I was going to do a meme about KCS and CN since their vote was supposed to be today, but Rare.net has proved me wrong. Hello everyone and welcome to my second Q&A response video. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions and for all of your support with this channel. This time more than 200 subscribers later. Anyways, on to the first question. How long have you been railfanning? I'm not sure exactly how long offhand, but the earliest photo I can find of a train is PRR 1223 at the Railroad Museum in Pennsylvania all the way back in 2012, and my first rare catch, so to speak, was now scrapped LIRR caboose number 2. Also, my first high quality or widescreen catch was a few MP15s at Port Jefferson Station from May 2013. What's your favorite Southeastern railroad? I would probably say the Southern. Don't worry, Seaboard Airlines is a close second. What is your opinion if all of America's Class 1s were nationalized? Expect your taxes to go up by 200% to pay for it all! When was one time you went full-on foamer mode? Since I've been railfanning individually for over a decade, or at least as a railfan or train enthusiast for as long as I can remember, I recall one time back in 2007 or so when I saw an MP15AC towing a broken DM30AC set out of Port Jefferson Yard, and I asked repeatedly to turn the car around to go see it. Another time can be found in my only footage of 404 with its MTA meatball logoed in Greenport back in 2019, where I can be heard calling the engine an unofficial heritage unit.
It's 404! What a too long out here with heritage units!
But since these events, I have acquired railfan etiquette and improved the quality of my videos. What is your opinion about the rail capital of the US, Chicago? Absolutely fantastic city to railfan. All 4 Class 1s serve there along with 16 different Amtrak routes, all of Metro's commuter services, the Chicago CTA, and extremely diverse power in a wide variety of yards and stations. I went there back in 2015 and I'm hoping to return there sometime in the future for great catches around the city with almost endless places to railfan. Create a quick railfan meme. I already have a good amount of these memes with my Reddit account on r/train memes, so here's another one just for you. What railroad in your opinion is similar to Penn Central in terms of failure? Now, I don't want to call out any railroad which may have a similar reputation since there are fans of all 6 Class 1s, so historically I would say the Erie Lackawanna. I heard they weren't too stable in the years leading up to Conrail. How often do you have to get rid of gigabyte space to make room for more recordings and videos? Thankfully I haven't ran into that problem on my current computer, since I switched my channel from my home desktop to my laptop almost a year ago, but usually all of the files for the Pennsy-Pan periodical are deleted a day or two after the video is uploaded to make room for more news in the next month. What is your favorite British steam locomotive? Tough question, but I would go with the GWR 5700. If you could visit any tourist road in the United States, where would you go to and why? Not counting Strasburg, I would say to Wilmington and Western because of its Pennsy steam locomotives. What locomotive in the SD series do you like the most? The SD40-2. If you were to visit multiple states, which would it be? I would say states that are known for a lot of rail heritage, so this would include Illinois, Pennsylvania, and California. All 3 of which are states which I have visited before. Favorite pet? I have a lot of pet fish and used to have a hamster, but in general I would say a rabbit. What is your favorite whistle and horn? Although I don't study these aspects of railroading, my favorite whistle would be the Nathan 6 chime and my favorite horn would be the Leslie RS5L. What do you think of KCS being targeted for mergers before CN swooped it? I'm somewhat surprised since Kansas City Southern is a relatively small Class 1 when compared to the other 6, but it's also relatively large at the same time when compared to what it used to be, specifically with service into Mexico, and that they were financially well off for as long as I can remember and didn't seem to have too many problems. I'm just concerned that whoever purchases KCS, that Class 1 may become too large to handle and could result in service and quality cuts in numerous regions. PRR or LIRR? I'm going to go with my home railroad of the LIRR for this one. Tough choice since the LIRR was a Pennsy subsidiary, hence my channel name. Favorite freight and passenger locomotive? For freight, I would say the CP Rail SD70ACU, and passenger would be the F40PH. Can I ask a 6th question?
No.
What is your favorite heritage unit? LIRR 404. Now for the official ones in the Class 1s. Amtrak is 108, NJT is 4636, NS is 8102, UP is 1995, CN is 3115, Metro is 211, and CSX is 4551 when it still had its B&O sticker. Favorite horn? The Leslie RS5L. Favorite railfan spot? The end of Comstock Road in Port Jefferson, since the former crossing has a view of 2 S-curves. What railroad would you want to work for the most? If I had to work there as an employee, it would probably be NYAR for local runs, but outside of Long Island would be Amtrak for passenger and BNSF for freight due to their expansive ranges. What is your opinion on 519 having a Conrail sticker on it, making it the only DEDM with a sticker representing a different railroad? So considering that this unofficial Conrail sticker was on the side of 519 since at least 2013, I feel bad for not noticing it sooner and might have to revitalize my top 15 DEDM list, especially now that 501 has 2 LIRR keystones on the side of its cab. But back to 519, I find it very interesting that a non-Long Island sticker was pasted on the side of this locomotive, as it was likely applied by an employee who worked for or was a fan of Conrail, even though Conrail as a Class 1 was disbanded around the same time 519 was built. My only other guess as to why 519 has a Conrail sticker is for Conrail interchanging with the LIRR at Fresh Pond Yard, or for the engine being rebuilt at Altoona Shops, which was owned by Conrail. But this custom sticker is likely an employee paying tribute to one of the greatest American Class 1s. Do you think a model train company should make an O-scale set of DE or DM38Cs along with a set of C3 cars? Yes! Yes! Kerchoo. Do you think that New York and Atlantic Railway will complete their purchase of the PR20Bs aside from 300 and 301, and therefore have the LIRR get their remaining GP38s and MP15ACs back? If 300 and 301 were successful, then yes. However, 301 seems to be permanently out of service, and 300 just returned from a 6-month or 1-year hiatus after being OOS, and I believe their order was cancelled after seeing how mechanically unreliable these two engines were. Now, if the LIRR does want more of their old stock back in service, I know of a few stored MP15s and SW1001s at Morris Park which can be restored at Altoona or East St. Louis, as well as a bunch of GATX GP38s which were from the LIRR. It might also be a good idea to upgrade the existing diesel fleet for both the LIRR and NYAR with cleaner engines or run on alternative forms of energy such as battery or hydrogen in order to meet environmental standards. Favorite model train that you own? Of the relatively large O and HO gauge collection that I have, I would have to go with an O gauge Amtrak GG1 with a set of Phase 1 Amtrak coaches. SP or ATSF? I'll go with the Santa Fe on this one. Sorry, SP fans. Do you have any other hobbies? Although rail-related topics are my main interest and career-focused, I also collect Hess trucks, coins, and Mattel 155 scale cars, and I've also been part of, or shall I say observed, many fandoms throughout my life, including Angry Birds, Fishhooks, Super Mario, Thomas, Don't Hug Me I'm Scared, Five Nights at Freddy's, M&M's, and some movie review channels such as CinemaSins and Saberspark. I also play the piano as well as numerous percussion instruments, and I have a large range of music with classic rock and jazz being some of my preferences, with some of my favorites including Brian Setzer, Weird Al Yankovic, Aerosmith, Nickelback, Billy Joel, Elton John, Queen, The Who, The Beatles, The Rolling Stones, Beck, Bruno Mars, Shmuel Yoho, Tally Hall, Tom Petty, Led Zeppelin, GNR, and the Bee Gees. Have any of your family members worked or been on the railroad? After serving in the Korean conflict, my grandfather worked on the Brooklyn Railport for I think the Lackawanna Railroad before becoming a maintenance worker for the BMT subway. Rodney. I've seen the video and I just have this to say about it. What is your favorite steam locomotive? I would go with the NYC Hudson. What is the best and worst thing you've done on Railfanning? Best would probably be pacing an LIRR Greenport scoot through Mattituck. Worst would be my last trip to
This audio has been muted to prevent future bullying and embarrassment. We now return you to your regularly scheduled video.
Favorite interurban railroad? The Chicago North Shore Line, since it shared the loop and a good amount of its history still exists. What is your favorite video on YouTube? I don't think I have one in particular, but other than a few memes and railfanning catches, a recent one I can think of offhand would be Beer Gear by Beeternity. Favorite historical railroad event? The 1939 New York World's Fair with famous streamlined steam locomotives from around the world. Least favorite model railroad scale and favorite model railroad scale. It's not that I don't like a certain scale, but it's just that I never thought much of it. Least favorite would be N scale and favorite would be O scale. What's your favorite engine? Nothing beats the Pennsy Streamlined Doodlebug. What's the loudest horn/whistle you've ever heard? I'm not really sure about this one since that would range back all the way to 2007 where I considered some horns louder than others, but a relatively loud horn I remember would probably be New Hope and Ivyland 8218. Would you ever consider railfanning in West Virginia like Shenandoah Junction, Harper's Ferry, etc.? Although I don't have any plans to visit that state, I would always find some time to railfan or visit a rail museum whenever I'm on a vacation. So if I would find myself in that state for something like that, I would consider railfanning there. Do you think Union Pacific would ever restore a gas turbine? Considering that the fuel source and engineering for the GTEL is different than almost anything on UP's current roster, and considering that the two surviving examples have been sitting idle for decades, I'm not really sure if UP would restore either one, especially since they already have a larger diesel locomotive on their heritage fleet, that being DD840X number 6936. Do you plan on catching PRR 1361 when it is restored to operation? Like I said with railfanning in West Virginia, if I'm nearby when 1361 is restored and running, I'll try my best to see if I can catch it while on vacation for another event. Do you plan on catching Reading 2102 when it is restored to operation? See my last response. Would you catch WSMR 1309? See my last response again. LIRR engine 3935. Which one is better? Not that I would say one is better than the other, but I would prefer LIRR 35 since it's staying on Long Island and seems to be restored at a quicker pace than 39 in Strasbourg. Why do my comments keep deleting? I don't know, ask YouTube. You and Ace Railfan have seemed to have problems lately with your comments automatically deleting soon after being posted. Opinions on Amtrak coming to Long Island? Yes! The first services I can see is probably Ronkonkoma to Albany since that only requires third rail to diesel, but later extensions would include Philadelphia, Washington DC, and maybe even Scranton. So I of course can't wait to see what new operational and railfanning opportunities this will bring to Long Island. Why do you think the 2nd Avenue subway is taking so long to be completed? Probably political interference, especially now that Cuomo resigned. Hopefully the new governor is just as supportive of rail transport and more willing to work on rail projects such as this one. I feel that this is another example where private companies reign supreme when compared to government funding, since the latter usually involves support from numerous politicians and taxpayers who may not be willing to support the project and lead to a series of negotiations which may delay the project and raise its costs. Do you think NJT should repower their GP40s with Tier 4 engines to continue their lifespan? Yes! Personally, I don't see why all railroads can't do that with their diesel fleet. What extinct LIRR locomotives would you want to be around present day? Even though there are 3 surviving members of its class from Canadian Pacific, the FMC liners. What railroad is the most underrated in your opinion? The Escanaba in Lake Superior because of its incredibly diverse roster ranging from SD38s to FP7s. What's your favorite railroad in history other than Long Island? As my channel name suggests, the Pennsylvania Railroad since they owned the LIRR and ran high quality service, and they created this legend. What's your favorite Norfolk and Western steam engine of all time? Individual locomotive would be 611, but favorite class would be the K2. These 482s were given the same streamlining as the J's, but were found on local and mixed trains such as Roanoke to Hagerstown. Similar concept of streamlined doodlebug bringing high quality service to relatively remote or unknown portions of the same railroad. Do you know the link to CAHSR's RFP for rolling stock and bidder manufacturers proposals? I wish. I remember you uploaded a video of this document about a month ago, but that proposal was from the early 2010s and is not up to date. Favorite J&R new type electric locomotive? Oh, what now? The Class EF66. Will we ever get a lot of Korean trains / KTX Sencheon or Japanese trains on our rails anytime soon? Japanese most likely since Texas Central Railway is using Shinkansen N700s, and Shinkansen seems to be more well known and trusted than Hyundai Rotem. But Korean high-speed trains seem to be a bit underrated in that they were almost never recognized for American high-speed rail projects, and that they actually perform pretty well, so it would be nice to see a few original Korean high-speed trains imported to the US if that were a possibility. Which JR East locomotives do you prefer leading the Kasipoya and Hokuto contest? The EF510 or EF81? I'd prefer the EF510 since it matches the coaches better. What's your favorite Amtrak locomotive / phase? I would go with the classic Phase 3 on an F40PH. What's your favorite JoJo character / part? I haven't watched all of Season 3 because Anime Planet kept on freezing at episode 10, so I can't say for sure, but favorite character would be Polnareff, and favorite part would probably be the Road Roller. What do you think of Amtrak's new heritage units? Yes! Before you ask, my favorite one is 108, the only Genesis to receive a Phase 6 livery. Which episode of Remarkable Engines are you most proud of? You know, I already listed my 3 favorite episodes in my last Q&A, but since then, I have a new all-time favorite, ELS 600. Everything about that episode was perfect. The story was great, the thumbnail was great, the music choice was great, the narration was okay, but it was still clear, and I enjoyed researching this little FP7 the most when compared to any other engine in the series. That episode in particular also contained a handful of firsts for the channel, such as the first episode made on my new editor, DaVinci Resolve, the first episode to use video footage, and the first episode to be recommended via community post by Jason Naselin. So without a doubt, ELS 600 is definitely my favorite video of the series, if not this very channel. Note, Amtrak Talco cab cars look weird, and one of the episodes of JoJo Part 3 has an SD70i in it. Agreed, and I did not know that. I shall now have to attempt to watch all of Part 3 to look for an SD70i. When are you going to do FEC E8 1594? Considering that school will be starting up in the fall, I'm not sure what my schedule will be for future narrated videos in general, let alone Remarkable Engines. But don't worry, I will still be taking suggestions, and that engine in particular should be in the list of upcoming episodes, along with Albany and Eastern 1866 and Sperry Car 140. What is your favorite steam locomotive and diesel locomotive? Steam will be the NYC Hudson, diesel will be the GP38-2. Favorite Amtrak service? I would say the California Zephyr due to its views. What's your favorite EMD model? The GP38-2. What's the best sounding diesel engine in a locomotive? Tough question, but I would say the GP9. What is your favorite commuter locomotive other than the DE DM30AC? The CN Class X10. What? It's technically a commuter locomotive? That, and I find American tank engines fascinating when used for such services. I would have said something like a GP7 or G5, but they're mixed use engines. If you won the lottery and could buy and restore any engine, what would it be? Assuming that you mean an existing steam locomotive, I would say PRR H10 number 7688, so this way it could be reunited with LIRR G5 number 35, since the H10s pulled virtually all of Long Island's freight during the final years of steam. What is your real name? PensyFan19. And if you want proof, here it is. If you could recommend Railfanning on the Northeast Corridor, where would it be and why? Without a doubt, that answer would be Princeton Junction. Not only does it have Amtrak regional long-distance trains zooming by at 125 miles per hour every 5 minutes or so, but it also has constant New Jersey Transit locals and the Princeton Shuttle, and I think in rare cases, Conrail and NS Freights. Other than Princeton, anywhere along the Northeast Corridor between Penn Station and Philadelphia seem to have the best action, since that's where 11 out of 16 Amtrak routes which stop at Penn regularly pass through, in addition to commuter rail and the occasional freight service. What's your favorite type of locomotive, steam or diesel? Streamlined Doodlebug. It depends on the railroad and time period. Some regions are more well known for their diesels than steam and vice versa, and I don't really prefer one over the other, although steam engines do have more history and are more interesting to witness. If you could go back in time to see trains, what era would you go back to and why? Definitely the early 1950s. That's when most first generation diesels were entering service while steam was in its final years. Not to mention, the whole aesthetic of post-war America during the early 50s with their film, restaurants, and music would be nice to observe as well. Can I get a Chick-fil-A nuggets, please? Sure thing, one Chick-fil-A nuggets coming right up. Do you like the ALC 42 Charger 301? Of course I do. It's a perfect 50th anniversary heritage unit by using the very first Amtrak livery on the newest Amtrak locomotive. Do you like my YouTube icon? Looks pretty good. Considering that your icon seems to be a Cars version of the San Diego Trolley U2, I would suggest having the eye pupils the same size and to have the mouth slightly narrower. What is your top 5 favorite retired steam locomotive excursion stars? From least to most favorite will be Union Pacific 3985, NW 1218, North Pacific 328, Cotton Belt 819, and Canadian Pacific 2317. Don't ask why, I skimmed through a bunch of these videos and chose any 5 which stood out. Do you hope to catch a video of ATSF 2926 when it enters mainline excursion service? See responses for Chris F. Railfan. Do you think mainline steam excursion locomotives should be fully equipped with PTC? I mean, if the government mandates them to have PTC in order to run on the main line, then I don't see why not. Might as well be compliant with federal regulations and having an engine not run at all. Do you prefer standard gauge railroads or narrow gauge railroads? Standard gauge, since there are way more standard gauge than narrow gauge lines in the US. Do you prefer steam power, diesel power, or electric power? Streamlined doodlebug depends on the region, but I would say steam for being more interesting than the two. Will you ever come to see the Delaware Lackawanna Alcos? See responses for Chris F. Railfan. What engine would you like to see restored in the future? PRR 7688.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Thoughts on Arcade and Attica 18. Looks like a pretty good locomotive with a long career for excursion service, and I'm glad that it'll be steamed up soon. What is your favorite Genesee and Wyoming short line? The original Genesee and Wyoming Railroad, currently the Rochester and Southern Railroad, as well as the Providence and Worcester since they were absorbed by the G&W recently. What is your opinion on Strasburg-Thomas and Metra? Two different questions, but good ones. Strasburg-Thomas, also known as BEDT-15, is likely one of the first of its kind to represent Thomas, and, although not completely accurate to the basis, is an icon in itself for holding the first Day Out with Thomas events in the US. And this engine can move on its own as it's an actual steam locomotive instead of a trailer being pushed by a diesel on the opposite end of the train. Now as for Metra, they're a great commuter railroad due to its expansive size and history that comes with Chicago commuter railroads, and I am interested to see what the SD70 Max will look like once in service from Metra. However, may I suggest that Metra should not focus on expanding the BNSF line past its historical terminus of Aurora. Instead, they should expand the Milwaukee District north to Walworth, Wisconsin, the Union Pacific north to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Union Pacific northwest to Williams Bay, Wisconsin, the Union Pacific west to Aurora, Illinois, Freeport, Illinois, and add 4 new lines from Chicago to Valparaiso, Indiana via Gary, Indiana, Chicago to Valparaiso, Indiana via Griffith, Indiana, Freeport, Illinois to Walworth, Wisconsin, and Rockford, Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Hello, Mario.
4 favorite diesel locomotives. GP38, MP15AC, E8, and SD40-2. If you could go back in time in Railfan, where and when would you go to? Good job for adding where since I already answered when. Where better the Railfan diverse power from the early 50s than the Railfan capital itself? What's one steam engine you would want to see restored and running? Extinct NYC Hudson, existing LIRR Mallard to see if it could reattempt its speed record. What or who inspired you to get into trains? Sorry to admit it, but likely the same for everyone else. On my first Christmas, I got a Thomas Wooden Railway set, which sparked my interest for trains. I started watching I Love Toy Trains and recognized American and Canadian Class 1s, I studied how to LIRR and Amtrak maps and brochures, I went on more train-related trips that involved numerous aspects of railroading wherever I could, I researched famous railroads, locomotives, and passenger trains around the world, I found railfanning channels focusing on the LIRR and started using more professional cameras to railfan, then the coup hit and I had time to upload my old railfanning footage and make high-quality documentaries and news videos based on existing channels while I'm at it. And now I'm continuing to learn more about the rail industry around the world every day as I'm focusing on a design and engineering career in the rail industry.
Among Us!
And with that, we have wrapped up the second Q&A channel special. Thank you all for your great questions and thank you again for all of your support. The next Q&A will likely be at 1,500 subscribers, but based on how quickly this channel is growing, hopefully that will be sooner than later. Thank you all for watching. Credit for the photos used go to their respective photographers. Join the PensyFan19 Discord server if you haven't done so already. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Have a good day.